Britton. Never in my life associated the word boring with baseball.
We know what's up.
Me? Yeah. Famous? Yeah.
And I'm like giddy over there smiling like, we're about to win this shit.
Did everyone give you crap? Give me a good host story.
I'm not picking it up.
We both love the game.
We talk about it every day.
Can't get enough baseball. Having some popcorn, you're fooling around your phone.
I'd have to wait in line for 3 hours.
Hang on, because it's about to be a wild ride.
All right, there's no human being I'd rather talk to right now on the planet than Tim Britton. Tim, welcome back. How are you?
Thanks for having me. Always good to be on.
Oh, it's always good. And you haven't even got a bracelet yet?
Oh man, I didn't know there was more swag.
Oh, bracelet, stickers, t-shirts, the ball of wax, Japanese t-shirts. And there's a first. Every day there's a new thing. Every day there's a first. And today is the first Baseball Isn't Boring podcast devoted to Francisco Lindor. And why are we doing this, Tim? Why are we doing this?
Gee, could it be because Lindor played in Cleveland for the first time in 4 years?
Which is kind of unbelievable. It's sort of weird to think that. Did that strike you as striking?
Well, it struck me last week that he hadn't played there yet, and that series was coming up. I had forgotten about that because they plays everyone. Cleveland. You're like, oh yeah, it's been. Lindor's been on the Mets for a long time. It had been so long since he had played. You just assumed it had happened by now.
Yeah. Well, so I want to ask you, Tim Britton. You were there. You've been there since they made this trade, and I've talked to I talked to Dom Smith, who was with the Mets at the time, and talked to Alex Cora, who's known Lindor a long time. But I value your perspective of it about how we should view Lindor, and really you're in the belly of the beast there with the Mets. So I'm gonna start off. I'll just ask you that, how right now is Francisco Lindor viewed among Mets people?
Did you mean the fan base or within the organization?
Well, no. I would say, I would say the most important thing is the fan base, because the organization, first of all, there's no way out. I mean,
the organization does feel positively about Francisco Lindor, but if they didn't, I don't think they would be saying that publicly, since he's signed through 2031.
Right, exactly.
The fan base, Lindor is hitting 193 with a 616 OPS. So, as the highest paid player on the team. So you can imagine how they're feeling about him in this moment as the team is struggling. The team's offense has been really inconsistent. Lindor's bounced around the lineup. They've got him hitting leadoff now, trying to get him going. And that this isn't the first time he's had this kind of sluggish start to the season with the Mets. Certainly in 2021, his first year with New York, he had the two worst months of his career in April and May to start that year, and rebounded from there. I actually wrote earlier this week that you look at what he does through this point in the season is generally not that remarkable. In the past he's had maybe a 740 OPS or something like that. He drawn out, he played a lot better. So he's made kind of the slow part of here that doesn't excuse. This is a team that needs to be in it on July 31st to make the front office feel it worthwhile to go for it. They're not a team that's going to go for it regardless. They need to be in contention, and they're kind of at that precipice right now where they're 5 games under 500 still. They've been at this point a few times already, and they might be falling out of it. Certainly in the NL East, they're falling out of it already.
So you mentioned the here, the now, which obviously is not good. But if you also look at the last 2 years for Lindor, he's finished, I think, the last 2 years 9th overall in MVP voting in each of those years. So if heading into this year, and you make a good case and you have good examples about how he's gotten off to slow starts before. So with that said, let's look at leading up to this year about, is this the guy that they had hoped and dreamed and everything else? Or is that impossible? Were the hopes and the dreams too much for Francisco Lindor?
I think this is like an average outcome for acquiring a player of Lindor's stature at that point in his career. Your ideal is probably that you're getting a guy who's still very much in his prime at that point. and that you're going to get MVP, not just MVP top 10s, you're going to get MVPs out of him because he was that type of player in Cleveland. Really only had the one down year in 2020 with the then Indians, now Guardians. So you thought, this is a guy, you bring him to New York, sure that, he wouldn't be the first guy to struggle in the first year and rebound from that. So if he can do that, then he can be kind of the central player for a contending team for a few years to come, and to bridge eras is what the Mets thought at the time. And it's not like, the Mets have certainly had bigger disasters when they've traded for players. They've had bigger disasters when they've traded for middle infielders from Cleveland in Carlos Baerga and Roberto Alomar. Lindor hasn't been a disaster by any stretch of the imagination. He's been, when you sign a guy to a $341 million contract extension, you generally know at the time, and I think Zach Scott has said this himself, he's probably not going to be worth $341 million. That like war per dollars per war calculation is not going to work out. But I think Lindor, has been a 5-win player for them in a couple of seasons. He's been their best player for a couple of seasons. He was the best player on a 101-win team in 2022. That's not nothing. And I think there is a section of the fan base that kind of takes what he does on a regular basis for granted because the offensive numbers don't jump out at you, because he's just like a very good, consistent, everyday player who posts up and plays a premium position really well. Those are kind of things that can get overlooked. And, just because he's not the MVP doesn't mean that he hasn't been a really good player for the stretch.
Well, so first of all, when Mookie Betts comes into New York next week, right, they can stand side by side, and you can say, "Oh, that'll make everyone feel even worse about Lindor," even though, right? Because you mentioned it, like it was relatively the same time. It was relatively the same idea where you're trading a guy for a bunch of guys, and then you sign him to an extension. There's in Mookie Betts. You're right, Tim. I mean, typically you're not going to get. It just so happens that Mookie Betts you are. So sorry.
And to be fair, like there was that stretch when Betts had the hip issues where you were like, maybe he's just a guy, maybe he's just like a pretty good player now. And Betts certainly the last couple of years has been more than that. So there is, Lindor, it's not like he's 34 and we're discussing a long decline phase here. He's still in his prime right now and can still, if he had 80 OPS the rest of the way, that surprised me absolutely not. It's kind of what he's done for 2 years.
So another part of this is just the other off the field, whether it's in the clubhouse, whether it's the perception. Alex Cora was talking about the swag and the personality, and this is what we like in baseball. How impactful has he been in that respect? In other words, there's a lot of ways you could look at that. There's the effect that he's had on his teammates. There's the effect that he has in terms of fans wearing his jersey, which is like a cliche thing, but it's a very real thing. So I'll start there. Like, when you look in the crowd, how many Lindor shirts do you see?
Not as many as we see Alonso shirts.
Really?
Yeah. So, you see Lindor, like he's probably number 2, but you still see a lot of Alonso. You still see a lot of DeGroms, actually. That was probably the number 1 there for a while. And you see the Seavers, basically. So, I think he's probably not connected, because of the way New York works. But what you do first, that matters. And because he got off to a slow start, there are fans in New York who will not forgive Carlos Beltran for that season he had in 2005, his first year, and for not swinging at Adam Wainwright's 0-2 curveball in Game 7 of the 06 NLCS. So Lindor, needs to have kind of that monster year, or have a really big postseason performance, which he's played 3 postseason games in 3 years with the Mets. That was not the idea either. And so hasn't had the chance to really perform on the stage like we saw him in Cleveland. Thinking back to his time with the Guardians and reading coverage from Cleveland, so many mentioned like that grand slam he hit in the 2017 division series, some other moments he had in the postseason there. That's where you forge your legacy in any city, let alone in New York in October.
So, and then there's the part about it in the clubhouse where, when you're paid that amount of money, you're expected to be, okay, you're the guy who's going to answer the questions when you don't necessarily want to answer the questions. You're the guy who's going to bring everybody else along. And for some guys, the personality, it's just square peg round hole. You are what you are. You're a really good player, but maybe you aren't going to be a mentor, or maybe you aren't going to be, a media darling, or whatever it is. How is he in respect to that other part of stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's very clearly a professionalism and an accountability. For a player of his stature, he is available a remarkable amount of the time to talk to. There's not a lot of guys I know of who I've covered who have been like that when they're making that kind of cash. So you appreciate that. I wouldn't say that he's been like this paragon of leadership for them. There have been times, you look back in 2021 where they had thumbs down with Javier Baez late in the season. There have been times where the Mets clubhouse has not been on the same page with the manager, with the front office, with the whole organization being kind of in lockstep with one another. And Lindor hasn't been able to solve that or has maybe been a part of that at times. So, I think in 2022, everything went smoothly. Everything went well. The clubhouse operated kind of as one unit. It hasn't outside of that during his time here. So, it's kind of a incomplete score on that at this point. It'll be interesting to see. He's taken more of a role, of an advisory role with younger players coming up now, with guys like Brett Beatty and Mark Vientos. He invited them to his place in Orlando in the offseason to work on their defense at third base. He's done that with some younger guys. So as the Mets kind of get to this next wave of prospects they have coming in, a lot of guys who might be on the infield with Lindor, he's taken kind of a bigger leadership role and understands that that's what, he's 30 now. That's what he's got to do as the team transitions.
Last question. Was this a good trade for the Mets?
I think so in the end. You look at, I'm sure there are Mets fans who will look at what Andres Gimenez has done for Cleveland and say, gee, he hasn't been that much worse than Lindor in terms of offensive numbers and what he's done defensively, and he costs a heck of a lot less. At the same time, I don't know that Andres Gimenez becomes that player if he's just doing it in New York. If you look at what happened to him in 2021, I don't know that Gimenez gets the huge opportunity to be an everyday player in 2022 the way he did in Cleveland. As well as I do, breaking in an everyday player in a big market for a team that's expecting to win now is really difficult. So I think in the end, kind of both teams got what they wanted. And that Cleveland, even though some of the other pieces haven't worked out very well, they got in Gimenez a guy who is, a better bargain than Lindor. And in the Mets, they got kind of a superstar that they can try to build around. The other parts in building the roster haven't gone according to plan, of course, but they're still set up to be a good team going forward if they make the right moves.
Doesn't it feel good to reflect on Francisco Lindor today? It feels good.
It always feels good to reflect with you, Rob.
Thank you, Tim.